Are you an overwhelmed SaaS founder ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where our listeners regularly hide Easter eggs in their code, and sometimes even on purpose. Well, I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you profitably scale from 7 figures, which is really good, to 8 and 9 figures, which is amazingly great. We create premium valuation, profitable growth, and freedom so that you build a business you're proud of and create a life of impact that you love. Well, we are in the middle of Holy Week. Tomorrow's Good Friday and Easter Sunday is just a few days from now. You know, Easter has always been one of my favorite holidays, and I'm not sure if that's just because the days are getting longer or if it had something to do with spring break growing up, or maybe it was hide and seek, puzzle solving aspect of it like that. It was always a lot of fun for me. It really took on significantly deeper meaning in high school as part of my faith journey. Some of you know I'm a Christian, Christ follower, and for me, Easter is the other bookend to Christmas, where Christmas is the beginning of the story of God's rescue plan for humanity and the mess we've made and continue to make. Easter is the completion of that, with Jesus restoring the broken relationship between God and man. And I know we have listeners with different beliefs. I have great friends with different faiths. Some way different or no faith at all, and that's okay. I think it's really important to be able to have differences and be friends, whether that difference is faith or political ideology or whatever. You never go wrong treating people well. And I'm never offended having conversations about things that really matter. And whether it's the same thing I believe or it's different. Some things around the way we celebrate Easter around the world. Here in the US, we have marshmallow chicks and bunnies called Peeps. I have seen those in a few other countries. My kids always love those. Never really understood that. It's definitely not my thing. Every day, 1.5 million Cadbury cream eggs are produced. Apparently, it's the most popular egg-shaped chocolate in the world, and might be the only one. No, actually, it's not. Actually, chocolate eggs have been made since 1873, which is quite a while, 150 years. And just a couple years after that, 1875, Cadbury started making the cream eggs. And so that's quite a while. It's a pretty good run for a product, right? I think I much prefer real eggs, though. Did you dye eggs, or do you do that now? I did that growing up, and my kids did as well. It was always a lot of fun making different things in like different colors and coloring them with crayons and then the wax didn't allow the color to soak in. And so you had some really cool designs and stuff. I'll bet you did know that actually originated in Ukraine. The original tradition was called Pisanka, and it took off here in the U.S. thanks to immigrants sharing their traditions. And so while I'm thinking about it, please continue to pray for the people of Ukraine. We have friends and family and clients and partners in the region. It's been a really tough year. Last time I was there in Ukraine was for the 30-year independence celebration. It's over there, 3 different former Soviet republics that same time frame. I got to celebrate. And just a few months later, that freedom was put at risk and still is today. And speaking of prayer, did you know that pretzels are an Easter tradition from Germany? Word is because pretzels, it looks kind of like arms crossed in prayer. It's common starting in the 50s to eat a pretzel and a hard-boiled egg on Good Friday. But there's really no wrong reason or way to eat a soft pretzel. I'm kind of craving one right now, just thinking about this, So what do you think? What is your favorite Easter tradition or memory? So send me a note and let me know. Well, our sponsor today is Champion Leadership Group. Get free growth tools and map out a plan to scale your SaaS business from 7 to 8 figures. Travel with fellow SaaS entrepreneurs on your growth journey using a proven methodology that is mentor-guided, results-focused, and peer-supported. Celebrate wins and quickly rebound from setbacks. Learn to do the right thing at the right time to achieve profitable growth, impact, and freedom. So unleash that growth for your SaaS at championleadership.com. Our founder on Tuesday was Luke Homan, SaaS founder, serial entrepreneur, and inventor, and 5-time author. We talked about his new book, Software Profit Streams, which is all about nailing the pricing model for your SaaS, not just once, but throughout your business life cycle. Absolutely great conversation. Our expert guest last Thursday, was Mickey Kennedy, founder of eReleases. Mickey and I had a great conversation about press release marketing and avoiding the dumb mistakes companies make with press releases. And I've done most of them. How about you? Well, if you missed either one of those, go back and give them a listen because both of them are fantastic episodes. And pick up Luke's book, Software Profit Streams, if you haven't done that yet. My guest this week is Scott Stouffer, 5-time CEO and 3-time founder. He is currently the CEO and founder of ScaleMatters, delivering go-to-market operations, analytics, and insights to help businesses drive capital-efficient growth. And there's a word we're hearing a lot about here recently, capital-efficient growth. Scott took his first company, Visual Networks, public in 2001 and grew it to a peak market cap of $3 billion. Now, that's a pretty sweet valuation. Since then, Scott has focused much of his energy on early and growth stage tech companies, building quantitative data and process models that uncover waste, inefficiency, and friction in the go-to-market function. And we probably all have things like that in our businesses. His process worked so well that in 6 months at his last company, Salsa Labs, he reduced CAC 71% and cut the sales cycle time in half. Welcome, the go-to-market master, Scott Stouffer. Well, hey, Scott, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here with you.
Tell me a little bit about ScaleMatters and how that came to be.
ScaleMatters, company we started about 3.5 years ago. The basic thing we're trying to do is help other early and growth stage tech companies get more effective and more efficient at sales and marketing. Kind of what's behind that, as you know, capital is very precious at the early stages. And, you know, once you get past seed financing, where probably until that point, a lot of the investment has been in product and R&D. After that point, you start putting a very sizable portion of your capital into sales and marketing and trying to scale and acquire customers. Unfortunately, there tends to be a lot of ineffective and inefficient spend
100%.
Sales and marketing. You know, what that does is basically burns through this precious capital. For small companies, that can be kind of a killer because it can, you know, they can run through their runway before they've actually accomplished what they need to. For larger companies, it just tends to be a valuation depressor. So we basically set out to use data and technology to help these companies become much more efficient, predominantly by being better able to identify where the inefficiencies are, where there's friction in their overall go-to-market motions. The genesis behind it, interestingly enough, before we got started, you mentioned nonprofits. Our prior company was, we produced a CRM and a marketing automation platform that were purpose-built for nonprofit organizations. And we tended to sell to kind of smaller nonprofits, not the big Goliaths. But these organizations are, you know, notoriously kind of low-paying organizations, but also high-touch, right? And as a result, I mean, the economics of serving those organizations can be a little bit challenging. So it forced us to get really, really vigilant about how do we make it very efficient for us to bring these folks on as our customers, knowing that, you know, once we had them, there'd be a kind of a high-touch relationship and that sort of thing. And we basically deconstructed our entire sales and marketing process, built models of it, rebuilt our technology stack so that we could measure it precisely, and started producing some pretty significant data that our management team used to basically dial it in. And literally in about a year's time, we were able to reduce what we call customer acquisition costs, CAC, CAC, by about 70%.
Wow.
And shrink our sales cycle by almost 45%. And it really made the difference in terms of the outcome for that company ultimately. So ScaleMatters is sort of an outgrowth of that. It's our concept of productizing the work that we did at that prior company so that we can offer that kind of efficient growth to all these other companies out there.
And that makes a lot of sense. And really looking at sales and marketing, not only quantitatively, but qualitatively. And so it's the combination of those two. So you want high volume, but you also want high value.
Yeah, for sure. And, we probably are heavy on the quantitative side. I mean, I think part of what we're trying to do is lead companies to be a little bit more science-like in the way that they manage their sales and marketing efforts. Because, historically, there's a lot of gunslinging that goes on and a lot of, sort of flying blind, et cetera. But there's enough wherewithal out there now to precisely measure this stuff that you can give the sales leaders and the marketing leaders the dials that they need to turn to become very precise in the way they operate their organizations. You mentioned qualitative. There's also some work that we're doing bridging between the qualitative and the quantitative, and specifically around messaging. So if you think about it, kind of product positioning and messaging tends to be a fairly qualitative issue.
Right.
And we see a lot of companies not really have that dialed in, and it creates friction for them. Makes it harder for salespeople to sell. Potentially, they're spending money on marketing things that are bringing in customers that aren't really in their ideal customer profile just because the messaging isn't right. So we do a lot of work to actually statistically capture voice of prospect out of call recordings. So if you think about, most companies that have a sales motion nowadays are communicating with their prospects via Zoom or something like that, right? Not kind of going and meeting face to face with them. And, so that presents an opportunity to actually capture that conversation. And we're leveraging some technology to be able to parse those conversations and statistically gather things like, of all the different priorities that prospects talk about, kind of how do they stack rank? Of all the different challenges they talk about, how do they stack rank? And so that helps our customers to basically begin to dial in their messaging a little bit better because they actually have unbiased, right from the horse's mouth, statistical evidence of what matters.
Right. And I think that's the greatest source of information is hearing it, not only hearing it from the customer, but actually in their own words.
Oh, yeah. No, it's very helpful. The trick is you have to have enough, enough of a sample size because otherwise you risk, if you talk to 10 people, it only takes one person to kind of skew statistically what might otherwise look different on a representative sample of 1,000 people. So that concept works best when you have, a velocity motion and you're having a lot of sales calls every week or every month type thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Where do you see the biggest points of friction in offers, for example?
I don't know that we look at a lot of friction in terms of what they're offering. I mean, sometimes the pricing and packaging of it, how they bundle services or bundle their offering can create some friction because they're potentially trying to force people to buy more than what they actually need to buy. But, where we see friction in general in the go-to-market operation, if you will, there's probably 6 things jump to mind. Like we mentioned messaging.
Right.
And again, when the messaging isn't right, 2 things happen. One is you don't bring in customers who are in your ideal customer profile, or 2, you have a hard time closing those that are. a big area of friction, or what I would call non-productive spend that we see, is a lot of companies don't have the balance between what we call top of funnel and bottom of funnel, right? What do I mean by that? Most of these early and growth stage tech companies have too many salespeople relative to the lead support or top of funnel support they're giving these salespeople. So they end up with, the vast majority of the salespeople well under quota. And then, of course, what happens then is the best salespeople who know they could knock the cover off the ball if they were given the right opportunity end up leaving. So it's a very damaging cycle when you've got too many salespeople. And these companies would be better off taking some of that investment that they're putting into sales folks and repurposing that to top of funnel instead, so they get that in balance. Every once in a while, we see companies that are prolific at lead generation, and then they don't have enough salespeople to actually follow up on those leads. So the same issue occurs, which is you're wasting money, right? You're wasting all these marketing dollars generating all these top of funnel leads, but you don't have anybody to process them. So that's what we call it. Generally, we call it funnel imbalance, and that's a very common area where we see companies basically wasting a fair amount of money. Another area is of friction is strategy. So think of the different ways. Let's take a B2B company, the different ways they might source prospective customers. They may do a lot of content marketing and SEO, trying to bring people organically into the website. They may do digital advertising, paid search, Google ads, maybe LinkedIn advertising. They may have an outbound prospecting motion where they have a team of, sales development reps or business development reps cold calling. Most companies have sort of an idea of how much does it cost them to get a lead through these various techniques, but they don't have a very good idea of how much does it cost them to get a customer or to get $1 of revenue. And so they haven't allocated generally their investments in an optimized fashion across these strategies, right? So that it's just another area where they're spending money, they're getting something for it, but it's not as optimized as it could be if they had a better understanding end to end of what each strategy is delivering in terms of return on investment. Another area of friction is just the time it takes to onboard new salespeople or new SDRs. It tends to be very long. The hit rate with most companies is not particularly good in terms of, maybe they have to hire 3 salespeople hoping that 2 of them will work out, right? So you end up, again, just wasting a lot of money because that whole onboarding and recruiting process isn't necessarily dialed in. So those are just a couple of examples, but they add up to tremendous amounts of money. I mean, it's not uncommon for a $25 million company that's maybe spending $10 million a year on sales and marketing. Probably 3 to 4 million of that is completely non-productive. And that's really what we're trying to help these guys get past.
That makes a lot of sense. And you're exactly right. And just even that last one, the hiring process and getting salespeople up to speed, there's an expectation they're going to come in and it's going to take them 6 months to ramp, which I think is way long anyway. But then that's really expensive.
It is, but
3 of them don't
that's
work out.
optimistic for a lot of companies.
Right. Yeah. How much runway do you have? If you don't get it right the first time, then, you're out of cash and now what?
Yeah. And it's a real issue, particularly for the kind of earlier stage companies that don't, haven't had the fortune to go raise $30 million or something right.
And even the ones that do, I think you said that early on, they have too many people and inefficient 30 to 70% waste.
Yeah.
That's expensive in itself.
Oh yeah, no, it's just crazy.
So where do you see marketing working well? I mean, what is working today? How do you get great ROI?
It depends on what your expectation out of marketing is. There certainly has been a shift to where a lot of awareness happens in social communities and other areas where nobody actually can measure it. And so I do think good marketing requires a little bit of a leap of faith in terms of being willing to invest in brand, if you will, brand and awareness. Probably 3 to 6 years ago, there had been this big move away from brand and all focused on demand generation, right? Because people were thinking, well, there's a lot of technology that we can now measure all this stuff so we can dial it in better. But, most of the venues like web forms, et cetera, for capturing that demand is already kind of late in the buying process for a prospective customer.
It's true.
And so to me, good marketing is making sure that you're known, people recognize value prop in whatever circles these people are, learning from. And we do see that quite a bit. People starting to put more investment in stuff that maybe isn't necessarily measurable, but it happens but its impact is much earlier in somebody's cycle to start to think about buying something. I can tell you some things we see that aren't particularly good or helpful.
Yes, that's equally as good.
One is, are you familiar with revenue operations, the space,
yes.
The term? Okay, so really just a few years ago, you used to have people who were sales operations, right? These are the people that administer the CRM and other sales tools. You have marketing operations people that are the people administering the marketing automation platform. Over the last 3 or 4 years, there's a recognition that having those operations folks sort of functionally separated is part of what creates a bunch of data silos within organizations. And so you go into a lot of sales and marketing groups, and they're constantly bickering over data. Marketing saying, "Oh, we created this many leads." Sales goes, "No, you didn't. You didn't create anything like that, right?" And so there's been this whole move to sort of centralize the operations, the data side, et cetera, so that it can be unbiased, which has been awesome. I mean, it really is for the companies that truly are pulling it out from under sales or marketing and putting it either under finance or under some central operations function. It really is beneficial. What we haven't seen happen is a commensurate change in the way sales teams and marketing teams are incentivized. And so you would ideally like, the people who are collectively responsible for generating revenue, you'd ideally like them to all be incentivized on new bookings, on the efficiency of it, right? So it's one thing, we've got to get this much new business.
Right.
It's another thing and it should only cost us this much to get it, right? And maybe this much needs to be 30 or 40% year over year growth. But if everyone's incentivized to the same core metrics, then you get people working together better. What we still see in so many companies, unfortunately, is, they've moved a little bit from, incentivizing marketing on number of leads to saying now we need to incentivize marketing on marketing generated pipeline. So they're just moving a little bit further down the funnel, but they're still not, it still does not cause the sales and marketing teams to come together and work together. And instead, what we see is marketing people spending an awful lot of energy, emotional and otherwise, trying to make sure they're getting credit. And it's just damaging. It takes away from the work that needs to be done. So that's an area where I think companies still need to evolve, is to get, force further alignment through the incentivizing mechanisms they have.
And that makes a lot of sense, because it's the greatest management principle in the world. It's people do what they're incented to do. And if marketing is incented to get those leads, and the only way they get incented is, or get it paid, is if they get credit for them, that's going to be the thing that they chase, rather than really getting those things aligned across the organization. I think that's a really good insight of looking at compensation and making sure that your compensation is driving the behaviors and the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, and it's tough because, in theory, you'd like sales and marketing to have almost identical compensation structures.
Right.
But
they're not.
There's a lot of precedent in the way that you pay salespeople. And I think it would be culture shock to go to the marketing world and say, okay, well, now half of your annual income is going to be at risk as well, right? It's much easier said than done, and I get that. But there needs to be some creative thinking around this.
Well, if they don't like that, you have to think about, what kind of quality of leads are you driving? Because you have marketing qualified leads, you have sales qualified leads, and are those the same thing? Is marketing is saying we're doing this, and sales is saying we're getting this? If then those numbers don't match up, you end up with people pointing fingers at each other.
Exactly. And that's why ultimately you should look at what the end result is. But anyway.
I like that. When you don't have, one of the things I liked that you said earlier was really mining those calls for customer language. And what happens when you have that message mismatch where you're really pitching one thing and saying it one way, but the clients are not really getting it, or prospects are not really receiving it that same way?
I think the downside of that shows up a number of places. Think about where is it that you're messaging? Potentially on your website. So people come to the website. Well, first of all, what causes people to come to the website? Maybe an ad, right? So first piece of messaging is maybe an ad. If the ad is, if the copy in the ad is attracting a type of prospect that isn't actually a good fit for your products, that doesn't do you any good. Right. So that's the first thing, is bringing in the wrong people because your messaging isn't quite right. The other is not getting the right people, right? Which means maybe your website. So a perfectly good prospect comes to your website. If your messaging isn't speaking in the way they think about what's important to them, they'll look at it quickly. I mean, attention spans are not very long these days, and people aren't going to go through a big investment to really understand what people do. So your website tends to be, the first picture that people get. And if they look at it and they go, well, this isn't relevant to me, or this doesn't resonate, even if they would have been a great customer for what you do, if you haven't messaged it in a way that they get that, they'll just move on to the next one, right?
Right.
And the same concept, we see it in sales messaging. So, traditional sales approach is you start with a discovery call, and, that's less about messaging and more about trying to uncover kind of priorities and pain, and, give yourself the context so you can actually match your offering to something that's important to the customer. But then maybe the second call is when you start talking about what you do, or it's a demo or something, right? And there, again, if you're not talking about it in terms that the customer thinks like, or in phrases that the customer thinks about, it's just going to miss. And the reason it'll miss is it requires too much mental processing on the customer to connect those dots. And that's really why messaging is so important to get dialed in, is because attention spans are short, and you just don't want to do something that requires mental processing burden on the customer.
And that makes a lot of sense. In my book, I actually write that prospects won't connect the dots, and we shouldn't expect them to.
Right.
But I think we do have that expectation.
That's what we're paid.
Right. Yeah, we should be doing that. And I think that brings up something really interesting. I mean, you kind of talked about it before, was just kind of the different incentives. So lead count versus revenue. So if you're bringing in the wrong leads, then marketing gets credit for those and saying, hey, I'm bringing in all these. And then sales says, well, these leads are terrible. I can't close any of them. So it's that mismatch again in incentive, because things are siloed.
Yeah, exactly. And then you start getting into, okay, well, how are we going to define quality, right? And I mean, part of the other problem is that at some point, people start gaming stuff. An example could be, I feel like I'm hitting on marketing folks, and I don't mean to at all. But, if they come to a conclusion that they get paid on whatever MQLs are, well, they may decide to implement some scoring mechanism within their marketing automation platform that is a little generous in terms of how it scores leads, so that, it looks like it's being done by technology, but they set up the models, right? And so you end up with more things showing up as MQLs than probably realistically should. And I'll give you an example of that,
sure,
or try to get a little bit more what I mean. In our way of thinking, lead quality is driven by indications of fit, intent, and engagement. So, you can kind of figure out fit, right? Because well, here's the profile of companies that are in our ideal customer profile, right? So you can kind of get a view of fit. But for intent or engagement, that requires action to have been taken by the prospect. By intent, I mean purchase intent. The fact that somebody may sign up to 2 or 3 of your webinars doesn't indicate any intent. All it simply means is you guys maybe put out some decent content that people that like to continuously learn have found you guys to be good content creators, so they go participate in your webinars, right?
Right.
But many marketing folks will set up their scoring algorithms. So if you sign up or attend a webinar, well, that increases your score. And it really doesn't. It doesn't give you any more indication of intent. And so, that's where I say people are maybe a little generous. Somebody downloads a white paper. So what?
I do it all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go to whoever produces good content because I want to learn, right?
Right.
And it doesn't mean I'm about to buy anything, so it's that kind of thing is thinking about what actions have the prospect taken that indicate intent as the driver of what kind of quality of a lead it is, rather than simply, what resources of ours have they consumed.
And that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that demand generation, just a focus on that, has really led to a bunch of low intent leads, so that we're tracking maybe a vanity metric of we have, this many downloads, but it really doesn't translate to revenue?
Oh, for sure. Now, it's gotten better, right? I mean, probably 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I'd say it felt like it was really bad. And now people are starting to recognize, that this marketing demand gen thing, which was supposed to be holy grail, it can be very, very powerful and productive, but it's not just about quantity. So absolutely. And I think Because I think a lot of people, what happens is if you produce a bunch of garbage leads and then the salespeople start to work them and realize they're garbage, then they just won't, then you suddenly get to where so many companies have gotten to, which is marketing says they're producing all these leads, sales refuses to follow up on them, right? Because they don't want to have to bang through 200 to find the one that actually is decent.
Right.
And so, and that's a classic area where we talk about is friction, right? You just have people spending money on stuff that isn't going anywhere. But anyway, it's we're all evolving.
Yes.
It's all an iterative process. But there's still a lot of people that go through the same motions, unfortunately, and haven't kind of gotten out of that.
So if we're really looking for a data-driven sales process, what does that look like? And how do we use that to drive action?
Yeah, so, there's a couple different ways it looks. I can tell you sort of what we have settled on as an approach is we basically refer to it as conscious or intentional iteration, right? Because getting optimized at this stuff is a series of iterations that all of us go through. No company is born and has this finely honed sales and marketing machine. So we get there over time. What we're trying to do is get people to get there more consciously than they would otherwise. And we start by saying, model the motion. So we want companies to think very clearly and at a detailed level, what does our process look like? And now let's model that. So for example, if we're going to use outbound prospecting, SDRs, how long does it take them to ramp? How much activity are we expecting them to do? Let's just say the activity is simply phone calls. Right? Today it's phone calls, LinkedIn messaging, email, all this other stuff, right? But for simplicity, let's say it's just phone calls. How many phone calls are you expecting to make a day? What percentage of those phone calls do you expect to end up in conversations? What percentage of those conversations do you expect to end up in a meeting set? Of the meetings that get set, what percentage of them will the people actually show up to the meeting so that you have a meeting held, right? So the first thing you can do is establish a model based on those sort of metrics and conversion rates that says, if we want to generate 20 meetings held a month, we need to have this many SDRs. Right. So it's forcing this notion of modeling forces people to memorialize their assumptions behind how they're going to acquire customers. Right. And then you go further down the funnel of the meetings that are held. What percentage of them after the salesperson has this initial discovery meeting are we likely to have the salesperson say, this is a legitimate sales opportunity, I'm going to move it into pipeline, right? And then what are the 4 or 5 steps or 8 steps that need to happen from that point to getting them to a deal closure? To me, a good model is effectively a spreadsheet that has each of these steps documented. It has expectations of conversion rate between each step, of cycle time between each step, right? So if from the time we hold the initial discovery meeting to the time we have a deep dive demo, we're expecting that to average 22.2 days, right? Or something like that. So anyway, point number 1 is you've got to capture your assumptions into a model at a detailed level, because that is the context against which you can evaluate your actual performance. So step number 1, model the motion. Step number 2, measure the motion. So that means that you've got to set up your tech stack, your CRM, your marketing automation platform, your cadence tool, whatever sales and marketing tools you use. You have to set them up consciously in a way that you can measure every step of that model. And you have to set up processes or mechanisms to help ensure that that data stays clean, right? Because one of the problems that a lot of companies end up with is there's kind of a cavalier attitude towards how salespeople enter stuff in the CRM.
Of course.
So you end up with just data that's not particularly useful to analyze. So again, if you're wanting to be good at this, at a data-driven approach, you have to commit to data hygiene. Now, you'll make a mistake if you think you're going to get there entirely by placing the burden on salespeople to comply better, right? So instead, you need to be somewhat innovative about, well, how can we automate some of this stuff? How can we infer how this piece of data should be populated so that we aren't putting excess burden on the salespeople to do that, right? Because the more burden that you put on the salespeople to do administrative tasks, entering stuff in the CRM, the more likely that data is not going to be very good. It's part of the reason why we like grabbing all that information out of call recordings. Again, it relieves the salesperson of the burden of capturing who are we competing against, right? What are the prospect priorities? We don't need that. We got it all from the call recording. So model the motion, measure the motion. And then the third part is basically analyze it. And, this is where, earlier stage companies are at a big disadvantage because there will be a lot of data produced by your go-to-market motion. Somebody has to have the time and ability to sit there and stare at it and say, what does this mean, right? Think of it like if you had a really high-resolution MRI of some injury, you need the radiologist to look at it and say, well, here's what's actually wrong with you.
Right,
Here's what
right.
we think. And most of these companies, you can't really expect the head of sales or head of marketing to do that because they usually just don't have the time. In many cases, they aren't really analytical, so they don't necessarily have that skill set. So this is where you try to, and this is where ScaleMatters comes into play a lot, is, our software platform is built as an analytical platform to kind of ingest all this go-to-market data and make some sense out of it. And then we also offer analyst services for those companies that aren't large enough yet. But you need to, it's a critical step, right? Model the motion, measure the motion, analyze the results. And it's through that analysis that a company that's truly data-driven will then decide how to iterate. And so it's not a very elaborate thing, right? It's really 3 steps: model, measure, and analyze.
Right.
But companies have to commit to that if they really want to be data-driven. I know I'm going on a little filibuster, but I think it might be useful. It's important to understand that not all companies are ideal to be data-driven. And why do I say that? Because some companies don't have enough data. So, for example, if you're an early stage company and you have one salesperson and you're trying to, you're going after whales, so you'll be happy getting 1 or 2 customers all year, which means you're probably only talking to 5 or 8 prospective customers in a year. You don't need a bunch of technology and stuff to track all that, right? It's easy enough for the sales leader, the CEO, to keep track of all that. When it's not scalable is when you've got a velocity motion, right? You're trying to, you sell something for $5,000 a year. You want to bring in 300 customers this year across 10 salespeople, right? Then there's a lot of data that is being produced, and it's too hard for somebody to manually keep that in their head. That's when it becomes important to be data-driven. So not everybody should strive to be data-driven, because in some motions, qualitative judgment might make more sense, actually.
And that makes a lot of sense. It's really having that context for the data and being able to interpret that. And,
Yeah.
and if you don't have enough of it, then there's no content.
Having enough data that, it's representative, because otherwise, you'll make judgment calls on a sample size that's not really high confidence.
That makes sense. Where can people find out more about you and about ScaleMatters online?
ScaleMatters.com, ScaleMatters. It's easy enough. And we've done some interesting podcasts ourselves that we think, provide some good insights and are helpful content for companies that are trying to get a little bit more sophisticated on, being data driven on the go-to-market side.
Very good. And we'll be sure and link that in the show notes. Scott, I've really enjoyed our conversation today.
Jeff, thank you. I really enjoyed it as well, and I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
All right. I know.
Thanks again, Scott, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. You can learn more about Scott and ScaleMatters at scaleMatters.com, because scale really does matter, especially in today's economic environment. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at SaaSfuel.com. Please subscribe and follow us there. Everyone who subscribes this week can magically deduct 10 pounds next time you get on the scale, because that scale doesn't matter. Only scaling your SaaS revenue does. That's what matters. Join us next week on our SaaS Fuel Founder Series for one of my favorite bootstrap founders of all time, Bridget Harris, co-founder of YouCanBookMe.com. Bridget leads a team of over 30 people in a multi-million pound like British pounds, multi-million pound profitable business with 22,000 customers and over 1 million people making bookings every month. It's a great solution and just a fantastic company. Their culture there is unreal. She's done a great job in building that company. And then next Thursday, from a trailer park to Sunset Boulevard, Jeremy Redmond has built 3 6-figure and 1 7-figure no-code tech companies from nothing. He is founder and CEO of TaskMagic, which is automation software for small business. So I will see you next time, and happy Easter, y'all. Have a great rest of your week. And as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at SaaSfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.